whenever. You ready?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Ready here. Okay. Welcome to another week of Secret Society of Man. I am Ryan, and I have my partner in crime, my cousin Zack, across the table. And today we're going to talk about what happened in the last week or so, specifically with politics. Okay? This is a hot button issue. We got people essentially just blowing up everywhere, freaking out. The world's ending, okay? Europe is crying. It's just the end of the world, okay? Everyone should know, unless you live under a rock, that Daddy Trump, has won, okay? And so what are your initial thoughts? Like, were you watching it the whole night? Did you go to bed and wake up, or were you waking up throughout the night? Like, what was the deal with you?
Yeah, I was watching, like, refreshing on the Google page. You know, you Google election results and it has the map. So I was just watching like that. And then I was also on the liberal Reddit, just watching people freak out as this went on, and just them trying to cope with the results that were rolling in. Biggest surprise is that I didn't realize that like 57% of this country is racist. Were you surprised to find that out?
Like, in what way? What do you mean?
Well, they
like,
didn't vote for Kamala because she's black.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that. You know what? And they actually talked about, I was watching, it was either MSNBC or just normal NBC, Care 11 or whatever it is. They were talking about how Trump, like, huge voters for African American and Hispanic males, like, voted for him a ton. So,
yeah, compared to the previous couple elections, he really gained a lot of ground there. And so one of the most surprising things, and also like one of the biggest mask off moments, is watching these like left-wing news sources talk about that very topic, and how many of them instantly went to blaming black people and Hispanic people for being misogynistic or racist. Like, they're on like CNN and these different newscasts, they're actually saying that like Hispanics are misogynists. That's why she didn't win that vote. Or like, Mexican people hate black people. That's why they didn't get that vote. And that just goes to show you what that end of politics and like the left-wing people, as much as they claim to be the ones that are not racist and are not trying to put labels on races, that's like the number one place that all these race labels come from. They just think about people in groups of like what race they are. And I think that that's one of the major factors that made people vote for Trump, is that they're sick of the identity politics with race and gender and being put into these boxes. Remember last election, Biden had that comment where he said, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. Like, that's the type of thing that they're sick of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was watching it, they're like, a lot of these college students are saying like they watched the Joe Rogan podcast with Trump and Vance, and I thought that's interesting, because I listened to Joe Rogan talk to Theo Von. He had him on again recently. And Joe Rogan he first started out and he's like, hey man, like, he asked Theo, what was it like having someone like that on your podcast? Like, was it daunting or whatever? And he's like, man, he's like, I just wanted to just have a conversation with him, and he's like, Theo being Theo, he's like, we're not some conspiracy. This isn't Democrat, Republican anymore. Like, this is New World stuff. And Joe Rogan spoke up on that, and he said, hey, he's like, that's why I wanted Kamala on. He's like, to be honest with you, like, I didn't really even care about politics or policy. Like, I more or less wanted to know, like, her personal history, tell me about what got you into politics, stuff like that. And Joe Rogan even said that her campaign or party, whatever you want to call it, her PR people basically wanted to make sure, is it going to be edited? Is anything going to be edited? And all these other stipulations. And Joe Rogan's like, no, we're not editing anything. Like, this is a raw video of just me and her talking. And they ended up backing out. So if that doesn't tell you, right, not to mention, like, here's the thing, okay? If Trump would have lost, I guarantee you he would have gone out on stage and said, thanks for your support. She didn't even do that.
Right.
Bro, she sends out like this guy.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's this guy? And they're like, yeah, sorry. She'll talk to you guys tomorrow. And then you just see this sad, like, moping walking away. I'm like, what kind of a leader is that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, about the podcast, that was the number one thing that when I saw all these podcasts coming out with J.D. Vance and Trump, that's when I knew that they have this thing won. Because, they always talk about young voters, and, like, that's the number one reason. Traditionally, they say that's the number one reason a Democrat wouldn't win is because a lot of their supporters are young, but young people don't vote as much as older people do. And I think a lot of this was, how do we reach the young people? And that is absolutely the way to do it. Young people don't watch Fox or CNN or things like that. Right. They have an inherent distrust of these things. Yeah. But they just listen to podcasts all day. And I don't think there's ever been an actual campaign that takes that sort of medium seriously. Mm-hmm. But that reached so many people. And I think she regretted it like towards the end, but then it was too late because Joe Rogan was saying that they tried to come back a second time and like did try to arrange it, and at that point he was like, no, I mean, I gave you a chance and I'd have to like move somebody else out. Like, I'm not going to do that for you. So that was a genius move on their part, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that as like a staple method of reaching young voters in the future is them going on podcasts. And did you listen to any of them?
Like Joe Rogan?
Did you listen to any of the podcasts? Because like I listened to Joe Rogan interview Trump and J.D. Vance. Yep. Theo Von interviewed Trump, and then J.D. Vance was on Tim Dillon's show too. So I mean that's like 8 to 10 hours total that I got to hear these candidates just talk, and that just allows you to get a feel for them in a way that you can't. Every time that we've spoken about politics, I've mentioned like nobody answers any questions. Like you don't really know who they are. Like they just kind of dodge things. You don't get a lot of information from the debates. But when you just get to hear J.D. Vance sit there and talk about his kids or whatever and just like talk shit and he's swearing and stuff and just hanging out, like that made me want to vote for J.D. Vance over even Trump, just listen to that guy talk.
Like I want to sit around the campfire and have a beer with him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And isn't that like ultimately what you want out of a candidate is like above all the other policy and things, like, hey, this is a guy that I'm cool with and like I'd be comfortable with him at the helm,
For sure.
That's what you want.
Right.
And people couldn't say that about Kamala. And then her colors did come out where, once she started losing, like, Trump was out there talking the whole time, like talking to his people. And then Kamala just, what was she doing back there? Like, she was crying? Like, what was she doing?
Well, not only that, but dude, she didn't like address people until like
way a couple days later.
Like, bro, we're talking like not wake up at 8 a.m. We're talking like, hello? I was like, is she okay? Like, I thought there was like a medical issue.
Yeah, what a leader's abandoning her people whenever she loses.
Yeah. So that part to me said a lot. It said a lot on who her character is. And again, were we there with her that night? No, we weren't. So I don't know like what exactly was going through her head, but my God. Like when you got this many people, she had like 65 plus million votes. When you have that many people voting for you, you need to like go out there, say a 2-minute speech and just say, look, it's not looking good for us tonight. We fought hard, whatever general things you need to say, and then retreat. The next day you can come out with a better deal.
I think I just realized what actually went on there. So, she's not very good at unscripted things.
No, terrible.
They need a script, right? So she can't just go out there and speak off the cuff. They're like, well, we need to write the script, then you can come out tomorrow. But you got to give us time to write it, put it on the teleprompter. Yeah. They can't just send her out there and have her just free ball it because who knows what would have happened. But do you think that she's just done? I mean, can you imagine her coming back on the stage?
No, I think she's done. I think she's I don't think she'll ever run again. I think this was kind of a one-trick pony type thing, and she's been exposed for everything else. Like, that looks even worse. Like, now, not that Trump can run for a third time, which a lot of people are like, thank God, right?
Right.
But if Trump could run for a third time, and heck, J.D. Vance might even do this if he decides to run, he'll say, like, yeah, where were you the night that you lost? Where were you to your supporters?
Yeah.
Like, stuff that you're doing now can still be used against you later on. So I don't think she has a leg to stand on the next time around. Maybe with better, building up to it, because she kind of got thrown into it at the last minute, which I'll segue into, like, all of the big media guys. Like, do you know who Jon Stewart is?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jon Stewart kind of had a meltdown on his show.
Yeah.
And he, to me, now I didn't hear the full thing, but when I was watching him, it honestly looked like he was actually more upset at the Democratic Party for how they handled the situation than he was just solely that Trump won. Like, it sounds like the Democrats are the ones that couldn't field the ground ball and throw it to first base for the out. Like, he was like, you guys, this was your thing to win, and you effed it up, you know?
Yeah.
What did you see it? What were your thoughts on that?
I don't recall that specific one.
Okay.
But after the election, over the next 2 days, all of the content that I consumed online was just liberal people crying and screaming. That's what I did for, what day was the election? Was it Tuesday?
Yeah.
So then Wednesday and Thursday, all I did was watch lefties losing it on YouTube, and all the tantrums on TikTok, right? And so a part of that is like these late night hosts literally crying on their shows. And that was a really striking thing to me. And I realized that one of the reasons why I voted the way that I did is because, like, no matter what the policies are that are being talked about, like, sometimes you got to look at the others, like, look at that side of things. Like, look at the people that are liberal and that are on the left, and how they reacted to this, and how, like, foolish they look, and how, like, they're literally just throwing tantrums.
Yes.
Like, crying and literally screaming.
College campuses took the day off.
Right.
The U of M took the day off for
It's
grievances.
just weak.
They called counselors. Bro, if Kamala, I don't know how to pronounce her name, okay? Just strike me down, okay? But I'm telling you right now, dude, if she would have won, schools wouldn't have closed. What now? At the same time, I don't think a lot of conservatives would be like crying or whatever they're gonna do.
Yeah.
But like, why not close the schools? Isn't that equal to the other side? Like,
Well,
what if
Kamala's not Hitler.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
that's the main difference, obviously.
Right, yeah.
But it's just like a weak response. And so it's like, why would I want to be on that team?
Correct.
Like, I don't want to be one of those guys. And it's like, you know, there's even on Facebook, like, you know, not the anonymous social medias where you actually know the people. Like, I have countless family members from one section of my family that was like immediately posting on Instagram, like, you know, if any men voted for Trump in my family, like, you're dead to me. And then, like, I'm still going to see her at, like, Christmas. And, you know, it's like, but now I got to, like, what do I do? Like, do I say, oh, you know, don't talk to me because I'm dead to you? Or do I just, like, not say anything? Like, I feel like conservative people, they're willing to not let politics get in the way of, like, their family and friendships and things. But then, like, liberal people are just willing to cast you aside.
End it all, dude.
And because of that, people were very, like, secretive about their beliefs, right? Like, I think there isn't a lot of people that were very outspoken in support of Trump, unless they really had nothing to lose. But I think most people avoided conflict by just kind of keeping that to themselves. And as a result, you kind of felt like the minority, like, oh, it's, in a way, like, I got to keep it secret that I am a Trump supporter. But then on election night, you realize that most people are Trump supporters. And so I wonder if going forward, knowing this now, especially if things go good and, like, Trump, you know, really changes things, I wonder how that's going to change, like, the public discussion about politics. Like, are people going to be more outspoken conservative than they have been the last 10 years?
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because they were saying that this time around, the conservatives had a very early vote, which historically was, like, never a thing. Like, liberals would come out early, conservatives would vote more towards the actual election day. Whereas this time it was much more like the opposite. And I found that very interesting because, I mean, that told me that there are people going out and they're making notes that they want to make their voice heard. I mean, dude, Trump only lost Minnesota by like 155,000 or something like that. That's insane. Because in Minnesota, for a liberal, you need like 3 counties. You need Washington, Ramsey, and Hennepin. Mm-hmm. Everywhere else can be red, and you still win the state.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know what I mean? So, that's impressive to me, man. 150,000. That's basically 2 cities. That's it.
Yeah, well, that's how it works in a lot of states. I mean, you'll see like most of it is red,
Yeah.
but the cities are blue. You know, I guess that's just
Right.
how it works. But you know, there's a lot of people that typically would consider themselves to be on the left that ended up voting for Trump, as much as they tried to make him out to be a radical, like conservative person. Obviously, he has some appeal even across the aisle, because I know multiple people that I would not have guessed that they would have voted for Trump. And when he won, I texted them like, "Oh, it's the T-Dog, he's back," and they're like, "Thank God." I'm like, "Really?" Like, I didn't expect you to say that.
Interesting.
And what they say is that Kamala just seems like a fake person. Like, she just doesn't seem trustworthy.
Yeah.
It goes back to the podcast thing. Like, she just didn't put herself out there enough. It was just this weird thing, man, where that was almost a strategy at the beginning, was for her to kind of like not be out in the public eye, just let the hype, speak for itself. And then once she kind of came out of the woodworks, then like people just were off put by her. And that's ultimately what made her lose.
Do you think that, okay, so obviously Biden and her are essentially going to ride out into the sunset.
Yeah.
Hopefully Biden makes it to the sunset.
He's going to ride out with a Trump hat on, dude. He was so happy that Trump won. Did you see that?
I mean,
he gave a speech afterwards, and he looked like the happiest guy.
Here's what I'll say. First of all, speaking of that, I know it was rehearsed and he had a teleprompter, but I was actually kind of impressed by his speech of Trump winning. He actually kind of came out and he's like, look, like, if this is what the country decided, like, we'll be okay. We're going to move on. Like, very more peaceful type of, just there's hope in the future and stuff like that. It wasn't like we're all going to die, you see the swastikas drop behind him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, bro, that's wild.
But that's
how
it should be. But then, like,
exactly.
But the fact so many people did portray like we're all going to die. Like, this is it. Like, it's insane.
Like,
how overblown that is.
I can't imagine how appalling. Do you know who Ben Shapiro is? Mm-hmm. Okay, Jewish guy, super, like, I wouldn't call him. He doesn't consider himself conservative, but like he leans right.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder how appalled he is being a Jewish person when people call Trump Hitler. Like, for him to actually sit there and be like, "Do you understand the gravity of what you're saying? Like, do you know the absolute atrocity? Like, Hitler was Satan on Earth. Like, I'm not talking about hurting your feelings here. I'm talking about genocide. I'm talking like he wanted to extinct a race. Like, Trump, that's not even close to like, can you imagine if Trump came out and he's like, yeah, all the Hispanics gone. All of them. Not deportation. Done. Like, we find you, you're dead. Like, there is no... Dude, that's wild. Like, when people talk like that, I'm like, unfortunately, like, it's so egregious. And I can't stand when people are like, oh, I hate history. I hate history. It's like, well, clearly, because you don't know your history, and you're the problem. What's the old saying that we talked about before? If you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it, right? That's a problem. Like, there are immigrants that move to this country that are seeing socialistic, like, movement, and they're like, stop, because I came from that, and that's horrible.
Yes.
Like, stop that, because you guys don't know what you're doing. Like, it's beyond. I'm off my soapbox now, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, every immigrant that I know, whether they come from like a Hispanic country or like I know someone from Greece that comes over here, they're so in love with like the classic American values.
Yes.
They love guns. They love voting. They all are Trump supporters. Like, you got to listen to these people. I mean, they are the ones that, like you said, have lived in these radical left, communist, horrible dictatorships, right? or just like failed countries in the case of like, Greece, where they just have major issues because of some of the way it's ran, right? And they come over here, and then, they're the ones that really should tell you what's great about this country, right? Because they wanted to come here, and they don't regret it. None of them are like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Like, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, and I hope it stays like this.
Have you ever heard of Turning Point America?
No.
Okay. So Turning Point America is run by like Charlie Kirk. Do you know who that is?
Does he debate college kids or something?
Yep,
Okay,
he goes on college campuses and stuff like that. So he's part of that. Ben Shapiro's part of it, like Matt Walsh, like all those kind of like more conservative guys. Well, they had a North Korean defector on. It was a woman. I don't know if you've seen videos of her.
Yeah.
So she's gone to college campuses and really has talked to students. And I just like, bro, like I was like weak in the knees when I heard a college student. I was watching this clip, and this college student basically said that herself was oppressed. And I could just see, I forgot her name. I'll just call her Jane Doe, whatever. Jane Doe was, honestly, I could see like she was trying to compute what this college student was saying. And she's like, how do you get through oppression? And essentially, like, she's like, I'll tell you what real oppression is. Like, I lived in North Korea. You're not oppressed. Like, there is a big difference here. And I think people get, like, they get feelings being hurt as violence. Like, that's not how it works. It's different if it's terroristic threats. Yes, like, I don't want someone saying they're going to cut my head off, put it on a spear, and light my head on fire. Like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But, like, whatever. You tell me I'm fat, whatever you want. That's not violence. That's just your opinion. You know what I mean? So when she was talking to this student, I could tell she was trying to, like, lay her down easy and be like, you are free here. Like, in North Korea, we don't have choices. She's like, we literally don't even have a cookbook because we can't afford to own, like, 4 ingredients to cook a meal. Like, now, obviously, that's very extreme, right? Like, if we were to start going socialist, it would take a little bit to get to that point. We would eventually, but it would take a little while. But it goes back to the foreigners. It's tough to see foreigners come in here, and they're like, "What are you doing? Like, what? Do you guys understand what you're like putting up on the stand for the country? You know?" It blows my mind, dude, and I couldn't believe it, man. I couldn't believe it. Believe it. So,
well, on the topic of censorship, like, that's one of the things that he promised to battle. And I think one thing that we really got to see here is he won in spite of him being censored off of all these platforms, because he's still not on Facebook. He's still not on Twitter.
Yep.
He can go on Twitter, obviously, if he wanted to, but he's just not on these.
So.
He's not on these platforms.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, Kamala Harris is, and she was being actively pushed on all these platforms. Shortly after he got elected, like over the last week, videos from Trump are going viral. I don't know if you saw any of them, but they're basically his campaign promises where he's just, like, reading off. Obviously, it's scripted because he's actually able to, like, deliver a direct point and not ramble on, right? But there's some pretty powerful messages. So one of them is about his main points is, number one, the cartels. He essentially said, like, we're done with drugs in this country. Like, if you are in a cartel, you're dead. Like, we're getting the Navy involved. We're going to go and, like, we're going to war with the cartels, basically. Closing up the border. Like, he's going after the drug problem and the people that caused it. And he said that, like, if anybody tries to stop him, he's going to expose their corruption. Like, that very strong point. Like, that's something that, like, everybody can get behind. Like, who says that? It's like, oh, that's not a good idea. The next thing is he said that he wants the trans issue. So he basically said, like, they're going after our kids. Like, we're going to make it illegal for teachers to, sit down with your kid and talk to them about how they might be in the wrong body. And we're going to make it illegal to do these, gender-affirming surgeries and giving them puberty blockers because it's causing harm to our kids. We're going to take away, the licenses of any doctors that are, like, doing this. Basically just saying, like, we're putting an end to the trans stuff. And that's another thing that was a very, like, direct point. And I think that, a lot of people online and things are very pro-trans rights. I think that, like, the average American thinks that stuff has gone too far. And I think they hear that message, that powerful message against that, and they do, like, breathe a sigh of relief. The other thing is the censorship. Like, he said that he is going to put it into basically, like, these conglomerates of, like, the government and social media, big empires that are, picking and choosing what you're able to see. And this election was a great example of how censorship is happening. And it's not just people getting mad at you for hurting their feelings, but they're actively, like, picking and choosing what information we get to hear. Like, in that information impacts our ability to vote with knowledge. This whole time, my number one issue is that I'm not able to figure out what these people really stand for because, like, they're not giving a very clear message. Well, it turns out all these videos he posted with as clear of a message as can be of what he wants to do when he gets in office. He literally says, day one, I'm going to do an executive order that says this, 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 and this. These things that are very popular ideas. He recorded these videos 2 years ago. These have been out for 2 years, and they're only now coming to light after he's already elected. I think a lot more people would have already made up their minds a couple of years ago about Trump if they would have seen those at the time. But he had nowhere to put them because he's being banned off of all the platforms.
I think that in and of itself should wake people up. Like, that is a communist, like deal. Look, I'm all for freedom of the press, right? Like, that's a constitutional thing. By all means, right? But there's a difference, like, freedom of speech and freedom of the press should go hand in hand. And it's egregious when you are purposely blocking somebody or purposely editing things out or whatever you're doing to shape that perception of that person. That's wrong. Like, you need to be fair, you need to be equitable. And I just don't understand why they believe the earth is just going to explode when he gets in office. Like,
it's because of what they've been told. So it's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or just like a feedback loop. The average people that you see screaming and crying in their cars on TikTok right now are doing that because all you see on Facebook and, in the media is negative stories about Trump and misquoted things. My wife, she was trying to figure out who she's going to vote for. And one of the reasons that she says she might not vote for Trump is because she's like, well, he just says crazy things. Like, he said that if we don't vote for him, it's going to be a bloodbath. And it's like, that's the perfect example. Like, exactly. Kamala Harris said that in the debate. She did that exact quote. But it's like, if you take 1 second to look into it, you know that his quote was that it was in regards to a discussion on the auto industry and how the Democrats' policies are going to ruin the auto industry. And if they get voted in, it'll be a bloodbath in the auto industry, right? Wild. There's clear context to that. And they 100% just take it out of context, and that's what they push, and that's all you'll see. And that's why people are so upset right now. And this reminds me of COVID. And that was another example where people were waking up to the media being a real problem. Is back when COVID happened, I was lucky enough to be able to continue my job. Like, we lobbied good enough so the governor let us continue our jobs, right? So I was going out every single day, driving around, showing houses. I just had to wear a mask, but everything else was fine. I was seeing people. Like, I had one of the most normal lives possible during that time. But then you have people like my mom, whose industry got shut down, and she was stuck in her house for a month. And I would go online, and people were like locking themselves in their house, not going outside. If you posted a picture of you and your girlfriend together, people would get on your ass because they're like, dude, like, you're not social distancing.
We're all gonna die, dude.
Yeah, like people literally thought that I was an asshole for going over to my girlfriend's house during COVID. Like, what are you like? I literally asked somebody, like, are you seriously like, you haven't seen your significant other in 3 months? They're like, no, of course not. And it's like, people were so freaked out about it. And all I could think about was, these people are living in a different reality than I am.
Yes.
And that's how I feel now. Because, like, people out there right now literally think that America is done. That's the reality. They woke up this morning and they thought, like, we are in Nazi Germany now. Like, this is it. And you and I are just going forward as normal. Right. Like, I almost forgot about the election at this point, right? Yes. But that's not how a lot of people are. And so it's crazy how different the perspectives are. They're so much farther apart than ever before. Yeah. And so it's like, what will it take to get us all back on the same page?
Sometimes what I'll do in my house is, anytime I see them, like, say something out of context for Trump, like, for example, like during the Hillary thing, like when they were debating, they would take something out of context that Trump said that just sounds wild on, like, a 3-second clip, of him saying something. Like Kamala had one of, he was in, like, it was like 3 seconds, and he's like, I'm rich, I'm not going to give tax cuts or something like that. Yeah. It's like, okay, first of all, Kamala, you're rich. So let's not get past that, okay? And let's listen to the whole speech that he was talking about. Anyway, back to Hillary. I'm like, Hillary called African Americans super predators, and no one talks about that. Yeah. What? Bro, that's like one of the most racist things I've ever freaking heard. Like, can you imagine if you're like, yeah, that woman right there that you're voting for called you a super predator? How do you feel about that? Like, bro, that's the stuff I'm talking about, where it's like, you can pick and choose anything you want. That person has some type of dirt about the same as the other person that they're crapping on. You know what I mean? So.
But, I mean, what do you think it'll take for the people that are that freaked out about this to just come back to reality?
Yeah, so here's the problem, right, is Trump's got 4 years, and that's it. There is no more Trump after that. I guess he could try and run for.
I just don't see it, man. Like, no, there's no Senator Trump.
No, but what I'm saying is like, the problem is like, if Vance or like somebody. The reason why I say Vance is because I can see Vance being like a mini Trump. Like, Vance to me seems less as a politician as anyone out there that is similar to Trump in, like, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking and how I think it is, and that's the way it's going to be. Because I've seen Vance be interviewed by news people, and he'd say, why are we talking about this? Did you know this person did, like, he would call them out.
Yeah,
he
destroys people. Yeah. I love J.D. Vance, man. I'm a huge fan.
So, all right. So, here's my point. Trump's got 4 years, okay? 4 years is going to go by very fast. And I guess my concern is, how far off the wagon are we going to fall once there is no more, like, person that's going to tell it like it is, Because think about it, if she got in office, or, like, dude, we would have been so far down there would have been people getting half animal surgeries. We'd have people, centaurs, walking around and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I mean, it's wild. So it makes you wonder, like, well, I mean, I don't know. I think dude's going to look like Narnia out there. I don't know. But I don't know. Like, it's just wild, dude. So, like, somebody's got to, and maybe Trump knowing this, actually might hand the torch to Vance his last year in office and say, look, when I'm out, here's all my documents. Here's my plan, what I plan for the next 10 years of what I would do if I had another term. I'm going to give these to you. Do what you want with it. I trust you, whatever it's going to be. But if this is to right itself, I think Trump needs to have a succession plan with whoever the hell, whether it's DeSantis or whomever is going to go about this. Now, I want to preface this by saying, people, don't freak out, okay? I don't hate left-wing people. That's not the point. We're talking about extremists here, okay? There are some Democratic people that I have no issues talking with, and it is what it is. In fact, sometimes I agree with them on certain things. But when we're talking about, like, mental health issues here, like, that needs to be addressed and not let run through. You know what I mean? Like, it's just wild. So,
but like, I think I agree with you that this is a good chance for them to sort of like have 4 years, set a good course, and then find someone to continue it. They'll be in a good position for that. But like, I guess really what I'm asking is there anything like, do you think that if things go as good as possible over the next 4 years, and like, things are good in whatever the year it's going to be, 2028, right?
Yep.
Do you think that the people that literally think that Hitler has just gotten elected, do you think that they are going to say like, oh, maybe I was wrong?
No, not a chance, dude. Even when they're buying their house at like 1.8%, they'll be like, this is the worst presidency I've ever had in my entire life.
Yeah.
And like, I guess no. So the short answer is no. And what I'll say is like, okay. I know what the comeback's going to be on this. It's going to be January 6th or whatever the insurrection day was. But here's the thing. People have to understand, okay? I kind of laid out a little bit about the Hitler. Like, calling him Hitler is absolutely wild. But you also have to understand, Hitler literally convinced normal people to eliminate a race. Like, normal people to convince that this race is horrible, okay? How long has the media been convincing you that Trump is the enemy, he is going to cause the world to end, or close to it, he is colluding with Russia, and next thing you know, he's going to be called the Kremlin, and like all this, like, bro, that's wild. Like, take a step back for a second, understand, like, what are you being led to? You know what I mean? Elon Musk is obviously, we talked about this a couple episodes ago. Elon Musk, Mark Cuban, two separate sides. Elon Musk is for freedom of speech. He has said it on Twitter, or on X, whatever it's called. Like, I could go on X and tell Elon Musk, like, dude, you suck. But he'd keep me on X because that's my right. Like, I have an opinion, that's my opinion. And I just don't understand, like, people do not get the gravity of censorship. Like, they don't understand the type of dam that's going to break if censorship is added. You look at Canada. Canada's starting to do it. They don't have freedom of speech. Bro, they're making their professors, like, have to call their students by what they want to be called by. Like Jordan Peterson. I'm sure you've seen that. Dude, it's a slippery slope, man. And when you start that, it's game over, dude. Can't take it back.
And the problem is, like, when things like Facebook are colluding with the government in order to push the government's agenda. Like,
That's a problem, dude. Like,
Mark Zuckerberg had come out and said that back in the previous election when the Hunter Biden laptop thing was a big controversy, like, the FBI did go to him and had him censor all of those stories. And that was just one of many things that, social media, you were hearing one narrative, how it's all a hoax, and then it ended up not being, right? We only found out when it was too late because the election was already over. Like, I mean, that's a real problem. And so I think that the average person just wants to get the information. And so, like, what would you say is the biggest mistake? If this is something where, like Jon Stewart said, like, this should have been easy. But what was their number one mistake that fumbled it, in your opinion?
Man. Honestly, I think just them showing their true colors. And what I mean by that is, like, how do I explain this? So, a lot of it was like, we're for the middle class. We'll drop the taxes. Okay, but how? And there was never really an answer on that other than we're going to tax businesses, the rich, stuff like that. It's like, okay, but like I've said before, you've been doing that for like 50 years and it's never worked in your presidency, like in the Democratic presidency. And so I think lack of information, lack of strategic telling people how this stuff is going to work. And just being overall, just things that you say. I think, honestly, one of the biggest tide changes was right towards the end, like a day or two before Election Day, when frickin' Biden calls them garbage or whatever. He calls Trump supporters garbage or something like that. Bro, you can't, dude. I guarantee you that alone incited probably like 20 million votes. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I think that was an intentional sabotage by Joe Biden. Dude, I swear to God, ever since that day he put on the Trump hat and he signed the Trump hat, remember that?
Yeah, I do.
So I feel like ever since then, like, he has been for Trump. Because he's probably pissed at what happened to him. You know, they took him out and replaced him with Kamala. And then that's probably why he was so happy giving that speech, because he's just like, hey, guys, like, I told you, you know, I probably could have done it, or at least he would have done at least as good as Kamala Harris did. But they just didn't trust him, and so he's like, hey, you know, this is what you get. But, I mean, that obviously is something that would hurt their campaign. And he came out and did that a couple days before the election. Like, I mean, he's been in politics long enough to know that that's a dumb move. So it must have been intentional.
That, or he didn't take his meds that morning and he didn't know what he was doing. But I look, the bottom line is, I think they couldn't follow through with what they were saying. I think people were extremely upset with how the country's been, the amount of groceries that are going up. Vance did that, like, infamous, what do you have, like, money in front of him or something like that, and he was showing, like, the cost of what Trump's was in his 4 years of presidency compared to now, how much things cost. And I think people were sick of kind of what you alluded to, was just the mindset of these people. Like, just the craziness and just, like, you really think that? Or, like, you really act that way? You know? I found a story before we started of a FEMA employee was fired for urging their rescue team from the Florida hurricanes, basically saying, don't help homes with signs backing Trump.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You're talking about people's lives here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, now, granted, the FEMA director or whatever came out and said they were fired immediately, and, like, that's not going to happen here, which, good for them. Like, honestly, like, how many times did you see they sweep that under the rug and say, yeah, we talked to them, and whereas if it was Kamala, they'd be like, yeah, they're fired, like, in 2 seconds, stuff like that, right? But I don't know if you would necessarily hear that from a conservative, right? Like, they'd be like, we got to save these people, whatever it might be. Now, are there people that are nuts on the conservative side? 100%. But, I mean, it just looks bad when the emotional decisions take over your objective decisions. You know what I mean? You're FEMA. Your whole job is to save people and feed people in crisis of natural disasters. And when you specifically go out and tell your team, hey, don't worry about the people with the red signs, like, that's wild, man. She's lucky she might be getting sued, I don't know. But, I mean, that's wild. So. And
same with the assassination attempts. I mean, you see all sorts of posts like that. Like, I mean, even after the election, like, I've seen so many posts on Facebook of people, like, basically wishing that Trump would get assassinated or wishing the assassin had better aim. And you just don't see that from the other side. Like, there's a lot of violence from that side. I think that there's two big factors. So, like, from the liberal side, I think one thing that they really messed up on was they leaned too much into social issues at a time when people just don't care about that. Like, I think there's a time and place for the progressive social issues. I think people are willing to fight for trans people a little bit more when they're okay. But right now, people want the government to fight for them, not like these extremely marginal groups.
100%, yeah.
Like, fight for me first, and then once I'm okay, once the average person's okay, then
once
we can
I can
make
wipe
sure.
my ass at home, then we can worry about others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so people, I think, were a little bit more selfish this time around, and I think that there's a lot of talking from the liberal side where they're almost trying to convince people that the economy is good right now because, oh, inflation is down like 2 points or whatever. Like, see, we're doing a good job. It doesn't matter what the inflation data says. What matters is how do people feel when they go to the grocery store. And, people don't watch the inflation data, okay? They just know how does it feel right now. And if it feels like shit, it doesn't matter how, because inflation can be going down, but that means that inflation is still happening. If it goes down 2%, that means that it's growing at a 2% lower rate, but it's still growing. And that doesn't make a real impact on people's grocery bill. And that's what, I think that just shows you that the Democrats are just not really down to earth. Like, same thing with all these celebrities supporting them. Like, you have all these people that absolutely cannot relate to the average person's issue, trying to tell them, to vote for, Kamala Harris. Like,
honestly,
that doesn't tell me anything.
I think that also hurt them. Like, there were people like Jennifer Garner and stuff, like, FaceTiming people in the voting lines and stuff like that. Like I would be appalled. Like, I would be offended if I had Jay-Z telling me, hey, man, like, just, you got to vote for her, and like, bro, you are one of the richest people on earth. Like, and
why you don't care about me?
No. Like, why are you telling me? And that's another thing I'll get on, too. Why, if Democrats are for the working class and for the poor, why are all the farmers voting for Trump? Why are all the rural areas voting conservative? Does that ever, wake people up and be like, yeah, man, all these CEOs are voting for Kamala, but half of the people under them and the farmers are voting for Trump?
It's because they're uneducated.
Do you not understand? The middleman is not the Democratic Party. Your CEO is not the middleman. The dude that is working 16 to 18 hours a day out in the field is voting for Trump. What does that tell you? You know what I mean? Dude.
But then they try to put those labels on it. Okay, well, those are uneducated people. You should be listening to the educated people. Not dumb racist farmers, right? That's how they look at it, and that's why they would. Oh, well, they're voting for Trump because they're not. They don't understand economics and subsidies, and so they don't know what they're voting for.
Sure.
There's a lot of blaming the voters this time around.
Yeah.
When you have all these experts and people that were in the media supporting Kamala Harris, trying to dissect what happened, it's all just voting for or blaming the voters, and not taking a look at why was the messaging off. The messaging just was not right. They're just completely out of touch.
Yeah.
Now Trump, one thing I really see from him now is he is a strong sort of leader. He can be goofy, but he has passion for what he's talking about. He's a little mean. That's one thing that came out in the whereas JD Vance came off really cool. On Joe Rogan, Trump did come off a little bit mean. He's just calling people stupid and dumb and they're an idiot, and that's not a nice thing to say about people.
No.
A really polished politician might avoid using language like that, but Donald Trump is just saying what he feels, and it's a little bit mean, but at the end of the day, isn't that kind of what you want out of a leader? Someone that is sort of mean and assertive and is going to be the man in the room on the world stage? That's kind of what you want. And then you see these videos of him saying what he's going to do when he gets in office, and it's very direct and aggressive. And even if it's okay, well, he says it's going to be the biggest mass deportation operation the world's ever seen. Well, I mean, that's pretty extreme, but it's he has a solution, and that's something that Kamala Harris was missing.
Correct.
Is a real strong vision and a solution. We're hey, we're getting it done. And now you get to see who he's starting to appoint to be the board czar and things. And the board czar had a quote where a reporter asked him, well, is there going to be a way to deport people without breaking up families? And he said, well, of course there is. They can all be deported together.
I mean,
it's there you go.
Savage, but it's true,
Yeah. So it's like, these people, they know what they want and they're going to get it done. And this is like the first time that I've really felt like with how they have no barriers at this point where everything is red now. It's the president and the House and the Senate. They can actually get things done, and I feel like they actually will. Whereas if Kamala got into office, I feel like nothing really would have happened.
I think a lot of what helped Trump, too, was the kind of out chaos that the Democrats have caused in these 4 years. Not just the economy of it, but we talked about the Venezuelan gangs out in Denver or whatever, where they literally are taking over like 2 apartment complexes. And like one of the Democrats out there said, well, it's just 2 complexes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what? Like we got people getting murdered by
J.D.
these
Vance
people.
said that exact thing.
Yeah, he's like 2 complexes.
Like, do you hear yourself?
So you're just okay to concede that?
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, how do you live with that? And I think, honestly, that's what I think. I think part of it is they did it to themselves. Like, at some point, can you honestly go to the neighbor across from these apartment complexes and be like, look, man, like, I know you're seeing some sketchy shit come in and out of this place. You're probably seeing people get murdered. But it's just these 2. We'll make sure they don't get around and be like, get the hell off my property.
Yeah.
Like, I'd say, are you nuts? And the problem is they won't live across the street from them. They're living in massive houses, right?
Yep.
And that's the problem is like they'll talk a big game. Got to help them out. Look what Texas did. Huge border crisis started. They're like, fine, we'll ship you to D.C.
Yeah.
Everyone, you're going on a bus ride to D.C. And guess what? People got pissed when they showed up to D.C. Why? Your policies are allowing this to happen. Here's your problem. Figure it out. And it finally caused them to do something at that time to be like, okay, like, we need to figure this out, because people voting Democrat over there were getting upset because you have all these, people crossing the border illegally. Now, completely walking around D.C., just tons and tons of people that are displaced now are out walking around, and they got upset. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You voted for this. This is what you wanted, so here you go. Here's your problem. In fact, why don't you take a family into your house? Because that's what you're here for, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what you stand for,
And then they say that it's not happening, like you said. Like, they try to make it seem like it's not even a real issue. And
correct.
So imagine living in Texas, and then all you hear on the news is like, oh, this is all propaganda. Or you live in Aurora and you see these gangs, and all you hear is like you see that get fact checked at the debate, like, oh, actually this isn't a real problem, and you're like, well, yes, it is.
You're like, do you want me to send you in a videotape of some dude getting capped in the head? You know what I mean? Like, dude, it's wild, man. And so I think that was also a driving factor. I think as left as people can get, like, at some point you can say this is what you want to support this, but when they start creeping in and that's not what you actually want, that is when I think people start to flip a little bit, because they're like, okay, I'm all for like throwing money at the problem, which a lot of times doesn't help the problem. And then when the issue is actually in front of them, like physically, literally in front of them, they don't want to deal with it. And it's like, well, this is what you voted for, so now it's time to deal with it, because you say this isn't a problem, right? So by all means, go ahead and help out with the situation,
Yeah.
So
what's funny is one of the most effective Trump ads was when they just took Kamala Harris's ad, where she was talking about gender-affirming surgery for inmates, and then they just played that one. And it's like, that's when you see that, like, again, you go online on Reddit and Facebook and things, and people will make it seem like that's like the average thing that people want. Like, everybody wants like that to be done. But then in the real world, the average person sees that and they're just like, what are we doing here? Like, is this really a problem? Like, who is this really helping? Like, what percentage of the population is a trans inmate that doesn't have access to gender affirming surgery? Like, how many votes is that really? They can't even vote from prison,
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think things like that is when they just cross the line, and that's just not the time that people wanted to hear it. And then I don't think they're going to learn a lesson either. So I think that, like you said, this is a good time where over the next couple election cycles, if they play it right, the Republicans can probably just like really get things done for a couple terms in a row. Because I think that like the Democrats really got to figure out a new game plan. They got to reinvent themselves.
And that was part of what Jon Stewart was talking about. Like I said, a lot of it was the blame on the Democratic Party to be like, look, you need to figure this out. Like, clearly somebody fumbled something, and you need to, like, step back for these 4 years because they lost the Senate too, right? Republicans took that over as well. And really, like, think about a strategy here for in year 5 when the presidency's back up, who's going to be running, what do we stand for, and stuff like that. But, you know, it's just it's very complex, and I think you know, we'll see what Trump does here for the remaining 4 years that he has for the rest of his life to be a president. And I think it's possible J.D. Vance may run for presidency after Trump's done. I can see him actually wanting to do it. Not to mention, speaking of that, let's talk about VPs for a second. Let's talk about Tim Walz and Vance, okay? Let me ask you this. How dumb? Okay, so for those of you listening to this that don't know, Minnesota has always voted liberal. Every time we've been blue. In fact, even when Reagan won, when he won like 48 out of 50 states, Minnesota was one of the 2 that did not vote for Reagan. So, fun fact for you, let's go back. How much do you think it played a role in Kamala picking Walz over like the Pennsylvania guy that they were looking at? Did you read into that at all?
Is that Shapiro or who's?
No.
Who's that? Okay.
Honestly, I can't remember the Pennsylvania guy, but people were thinking you'd go with Pennsylvania because you're going to win Minnesota anyway.
Right.
So why wouldn't you go for a swing state? Like Trump took Vance from Ohio, right? So why wouldn't you go for Pennsylvania? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? You know?
Yeah, I never thought of that. I wanted to talk about, like, I don't know the Shapiro guy, but apparently people really think that he should have been the pick for vice president, but they thought that her ego couldn't handle it because he was such a better candidate and speaker that she would have got overshadowed, and she didn't want to handle that. So she picked Tim Walz, and he's just not, like, super well known or respected. No. And he just was a 0 pick. Like, I can't think of any real outshining moments from him, whereas I can think of a lot of times that J.D. Vance swung my my opinion of that team, right? I almost would have preferred that Tim came out and said things that I really disagreed with and swung my opinion in the opposite direction. Like, at least that would have been memorable, and somebody would have agreed with that. But, like, I just don't really remember him having any good moments that helped or hurt the campaign. It just was like a nothing pick.
Correct. Yeah, it was surprising. It was really surprising to me that she picked Walz. Not to mention that Walz doesn't really get a lot of backing in Minnesota either. It's very much kind of like metro area, and the rest is red. Mm-hmm. So I don't think she did a lot of like looking into that either. Like he's not really like a bipartisan person. Whereas I don't know much about the Pennsylvania guy, but I can't imagine that he was any worse than what Walz was. So that was whoever. And I don't know if she solely made that pick or if she had one of her people go look out and be like, yeah, here's your odds with this and that and whatever. Whoever made that decision, like, needs to be fired. Because, my God, like, that was horrible studying, dude.
I think they just picked him based off of his character of, you know, I like to go to the state fair and eat funnel
football
cakes.
Football coach in high school, like, all that stuff.
So they thought that was going to have more of a relatable pull. I don't know what demographic they were really going for there, but they thought that was going to do something for him, and ultimately it just didn't. Because, like, you know what? Like, people hated J.D. Vance right away. Even Trump himself at his speech where he won, he was like, you know, I got some heat for it, but he ended up being a really good pick, and he was right. People thought that dude was weird as fuck when he first came out. Because he just, like, his first couple speeches he was trying to be funny like Trump, and he just couldn't pull it off. Eventually, he came into his own and ended up being my favorite of this election. But Walz didn't have that arc where like he didn't change anybody's opinion on him or Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. We'll see where this goes. I think, and look, at the end of the day, Trump was a master act at it. He maneuvered around great. I think one of the biggest things that just hindered them, the Democrats, was the stuff that continued to develop with immigration and stuff like that. Just picking walls, I think, was a problem. I think letting Biden just start the race was an issue. I think they should have got to Biden a lot earlier and been like, look, no offense, man, like, you can't run here. Like, the second Biden started debating with Trump that night, I mean, it was like,
yeah, it was over.
Like, bro, like, you know what I mean? And it may have ended differently if Kamala was in place of Biden that night. Like, I don't know, like, who knows what the outcome would have been. Would have been better than what Biden put up, maybe.
He should have stepped down because that's what he promised to do when he got elected.
Yeah.
He said, like, I'm just going to do it for 4 years.
Yep.
Then we can get someone else in. And then for whatever reason, he went back on that.
Yeah, he just put up a fight. So, anyway, well, you got anything else?
That's all I got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for you guys that are listening, if you want to comment on what your thoughts are on the left or right side of politics, please let us know. We'll try and respond to your comments when we can, of course, and we appreciate that. Please like and subscribe, of course, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening.